there's been a lot of questions about when and if a regional war would pop off between Israel, Hezbollah, Hamas, and their allies and partners around the region that are largely backed by Iran. And I think the attack early this morning, it happened at about around 1 a.m. This really sort of signaled that we have entered this larger regional war that everyone has been talking about.
Our attention is drawn as ever towards the Middle East. The front page of the Times shows a line of Israeli tanks on a patch of bare ground near the Lebanese border. It seems like they're preparing for a ground invasion to follow up their attacks on Hezbollah's leadership. 1 million people have been displaced in the conflict. Let's talk to Hunter Williamson, who's a journalist in Beirut. Hunter, good morning to you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
It's a great pleasure to speak to you. Is the feeling there that there are tanks coming?
Everyone is very much on edge and worried that there is going to be. Certainly, there are some who think it's just more show of force in a way, more pressure from Israel. And there are others who are dreadfully worried about it.
The center of Beirut was hit by a strike. We were saying that's the first time the central part of Beirut's been hit for almost 20 years. Does that feel like a big moment?
Yes, this marks a major escalation, and I think for the past year now, since the start of this conflict on October 7th, there's been a lot of questions about when and if a regional war would pop off between Israel, Hezbollah, Hamas, and their allies and partners around the region that are largely backed by Iran. And I think the attack early this morning, it happened at about around 1 a.m. This really sort of signaled that we have entered this larger regional war that everyone has been talking about. The reason being, Israel has largely been targeting Hezbollah and to a lesser degree Hamas here in Lebanon. But last night, this attack targeted members from the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. This is a group that's been active in Lebanon for some time, but has largely not been so deeply involved in this conflict. At least they haven't really been a major player in it. But Israel has said that they are going to go after anyone who threatens their safety and security. And by striking a part of Beirut that they previously have not, and as you mentioned, has not been hit in 20 years. This really signals that the conflict has entered a whole new arena, and we really just don't know where things are going to go from here.
And it's impossible to gauge the move of an entire people, but how does civil society in Lebanon respond to this? Because Lebanon and Hezbollah are distinct entities. Hezbollah does not represent the Lebanese people to any great extent. What's the view then of... Is this a view that Israel is entitled to go after Hezbollah? Is it a view that by attacking Hezbollah in the way they're doing, they are going after the people of Lebanon as well? How do you judge the response of the Lebanese to this?
Right. You raised a very important point for understanding the Lebanese context, which is Hezbollah does not represent the Lebanese government, but it is part of the Lebanese government. But the Lebanese government is very weak and very unpopular, and basically entirely unable to defend Lebanon's sovereignty. It's Hezbollah who's largely been given the credit, and this is a controversial topic in Lebanon, but Hezbollah has largely been credited with being the only force capable of protecting Lebanon. But in these past really 2 weeks, they've taken a very heavy blow. Their leadership has been decimated. Their capabilities have been, I think it's impossible for anyone to know right now just how much their capabilities have been destroyed, but it seems safe to say that that their capabilities have taken a heavy blow as well. As far as the reaction of Lebanese in the country, is this an attack on Lebanon itself, or is it an attack on Hezbollah? This is sort of divided, and it speaks to how polarized Lebanon is along religious sectarian lines. There are certainly internal opponents of Hezbollah who see this as largely a war on Hezbollah. And they point to the fact that Israel has been launching what it calls precision strikes on Hezbollah targets. Now, these are killing civilians, but critics of Hezbollah will point to this as proof that this is a war between Israel and Hezbollah. But there are plenty who will say that this is a war on Lebanon. So it really depends who you
Yeah.
speak to. And you can even find Hezbollah critics who will still say that this is a war on Lebanon.
Yeah. And it looks like a war that is getting closer and closer and closer. Hunter, good to speak to you. Stay safe. Thank you for joining us.
Let's start tonight in the Middle East, where Israel says it's carried out a large-scale airstrike on Yemen, targeting what it calls military targets in the Houthi terrorist regime. Meanwhile, Israel appeared to be gearing up for a ground invasion of Lebanon, as hundreds of tanks massed on the country's northern border. That story also makes the front page of the Times tomorrow. The big splash: Israeli tanks at border as Lebanon braces for battle. Let's take a wide view of this with Chris Parry, who is former Director General at the Ministry of Defence. Chris, hello, good evening.
Good evening, everybody.
Let's just start there, Chris, if you can. We wondered yesterday if Benjamin Netanyahu's comments, where he said that scores had been settled in the killing of Hezbollah's leader, meant that a ground invasion wouldn't happen. Are we to conclude from those movements that that was wrong?
Well, I think we have to remember that Israel is in the middle of an existential struggle against about 7 fronts where it's being attacked at the moment. So what you say and what you do are 2 different things in wartime. So I think we really need to judge things by what's going on the ground. What we're seeing is a full-scale assault on the Hezbollah leadership. Its head has been assassinated, his replacement's been assassinated, and as you know, about 1,500 pages and walkie-talkies have gone off in people's hands and in people's pockets, and it's thoroughly disrupted and decapitated the leadership. I think a ground invasion in southern Lebanon is on the cards, mainly because in 2006, when Israel withdrew from the most recent confrontation, it was agreed that Hezbollah would withdraw behind the Litani River, which is some way to the north of the border. They failed to do that, and quite a lot of their operations, particularly their rocket missile launches and their raids into northern Israel, take place from that area. So I suspect the Israelis want to clear that area all the way up to the Litani River to make sure that the 80,000 people who have evacuated northern Israel since the 7th of October last year can actually go back home again and start to live normal lives.
Right, and we've heard from Israel's allies, chiefly the United States of America, that an invasion of that sort, an incursion of that sort, would not be desirable. They have urged Israel to show restraint. I think privately, Joe Biden is due to speak with Benjamin Netanyahu probably any minute now, I think, or certainly perhaps in the coming hours, as the time differences allow. Joe Biden has probably, he's encouraged Israel to exercise restraint. Privately, I'm sure he uses perhaps firmer language. Is it desirable for anybody, for Israel, to carry out that kind of an incursion?
Well, you can only ask the Israelis. They're the ones whose interests and security are most threatened. What the American administration says in public and what it says in private, of course, are 2 separate things. And I'm sure that the whole free world, let alone the United States, is delighted that Hamas is being destroyed, and also Hezbollah as well. Let's face it, Hezbollah is a major promoter of terror. It's also a major purveyor of drugs throughout the world. It's a criminal terrorist organization. So we should all welcome the fact that somebody is trying to sort them out. But we shouldn't be in any doubt that the only people who have a vote here are the Israelis. They're the ones who are under threat, and I wouldn't seek to give them advice at any stage right now.
You wouldn't, because obviously the US's concern on this, Chris, is that this could be escalatory, and that it could pull Iran into a wider conflict in the Middle East that could potentially even threaten Israel's security. I suppose that's the argument that Joe Biden will make to Benjamin Netanyahu is, whilst of course full support for targeting and defeating, if possible, terrorist organizations like Hezbollah and Hamas, but ultimately if you do something that threatens your own security and the security of the region, that could be counterproductive.
Yeah, I hear that, but the fact of life is, if Iran were going to do something to widen the conflict, it would have done it by now. Obviously, Israel is taking on not just Hezbollah and Hamas, it's now taking on the Houthis. So it's trying to sort out all its problems in one go. I can tell you they're also engaged in Iraq and Syria and 2 other fronts as well. So they're trying to deal with everything at once. Now, if had been escalatory, if Iran had wanted a war, then it would have happened by now. And I think anybody sensible in the United States knows that. Right now, Russia and China are staying out; they're not getting involved. And frankly, I don't see much chance of escalation. Iran certainly doesn't need a war right now. Its own leadership is destabilized. There's been a succession crisis. The Ayatollah Khomeini is on his last legs. And frankly, they don't know what the Israelis have got up their sleeve for them if they misbehave. So as long as the Israelis can contain this themselves within the objectives they want to achieve within southern Lebanon, in relation to the Houthis and to Hamas and these other fronts, I think you'll see that it'll go for as long as the Israelis need it to happen, and it'll settle down again.
And so, just to be really clear, Chris, and not to put you on the spot or force you into saying something that we'll hold you to, obviously, but I just want to be really clear. Given your proximity to this and your insight, which is very valuable, you feel that the chances now of direct conflict between Iran and Israel are low or unlikely?
Low, because it's not in the interests of either country to engage in direct, open conflict. I think you'll see some terrorism. I think you'll see some attempts by Iran to use their proxies to harm Israel. But right now, Iran does not need a full-scale war with Israel or indeed anybody else. Okay, Chris, and the other thing, Daryl, let's face it, the United States is not going to let Israel suffer any more damage than it's done on the 7th of October last year.
Okay, Chris, thank you for your time tonight. Appreciate it. Chris Parry, he was a former Director General at the Ministry of Defence, with us on Times Radio.